took advantage of. Aggressive social suicide. I refuse to die, not by your side. So I'll take what I can from you, then I'll hide. And send the lucid dreams for another time. Without me.
Substitution is another way to format a string, right? It's not the same as what we did before with like basic formatting like upper and lower, because you can actually use basic formatting on string substitution as well. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to format a string based off of some sort of variable. So it's a variable based keyword argument string. We'll see what that means in a second. So let's go ahead and copy and paste this first line in here and let's print it out and let's talk about it. So first of all, I have a variable that I declared as text and I set it equal to this string, right? So this says this is curly brackets variable underscore a curly brackets formatted string dot format. So dot format is the key here. And then we use variable a equals to variable based, right? So that replaced everything for us. So let's go line by line on what's going on here, or actually part by part. So if we look at this string, this is a curly brackets var in curly brackets string. It doesn't do a whole lot, right? So right now it's just some random string that just says this is a var string. So what we can use is dot format, and we can change var to being something else by saying var equals to, and then I say like ABC or really, really cool, and then hit enter, and it replaces that. So we can make it even better and say my name is, and use that curly brackets and say name as the variable, right? So name, this right here is part of the string, this right here is a variable, and then I do period, quotes, and then do dot format, and I say name equals to Justin. And again, the string is the name variable right here is equal to some sort of string, right? It's going to format it into this string itself as well. So if I hit enter, boom, that works. Now I could also say create a new variable and say my underscore name equals to Justin. So my underscore name is a variable. And now I say name is, and then I'll say the name as a new variable, and then do quotes dot format the underscore name equals to my underscore name, and there we go. So these variables, remember, these can be interchanged. A lot of times they might seem confusing at first because you're like, well, hey, it's saying name, name, and name. It says name a lot of times and it's a little confusing. But just remember that when you see something inside of these curly brackets, especially with format, those are variables that can change based on how you want to call them. Now, of course, if they're conflicting with a variable of Python, like for instance, if you said str, well, that's a built-in Python class that turns something into a string. So if I said str12, it turns 12 into a string of 12, not the number 12, which we've talked about. But the point is when you use variables, you don't want to override those types of things. So this is very basic, but it's also very cool. So let's actually go back to this and say the name is the name. Well, I can also add in /n and say the name is the name, right? So notice I'm using the variable 3 times. I press enter, and there we go. If I notice that slash is still in there, it did not format it. So if I did print this entire thing, then it would be formatted. But we see that that actual variable that's coming through is going to replace every single time. This is string substitution. It's replacing it into the spot that you called it. Now, if I did a different one, so let's say the name is the name, and then I said, let's say, for instance, I messed up on one of the variables at the end, I press enter, it's going to say key error, right? It's giving me this error because it doesn't understand that based on what we passed in the format. So I'd say the nay equals to something else, right? I'd actually have to call that, or at least declare it when I'm using this format method, right? So that's actually pretty cool, and there's definitely some more stuff on here that you can play around with as far as format with keyword arguments. So this is just a keyword argument, right? So that's a keyword right there, and this is the argument that goes into that keyword. So the next part is just regular arguments. So arguments that aren't named, basically. We don't give them a name, we just have them in some sort of order. So to do this, we'll say text equals to this is a argument, and we'll just put in 0, not a name, right? Just a position number basically is 0, and then you do dot format, and I just put in whatever I want. So here, that is position 0. I press enter, and then I do text, and I see that that argument's there. And just like what we did with the variable or the variable argument or the keyword argument, we can do the same thing with the position of the regular argument itself. So again, repeating it. Now, something like this is going to really stick in once you actually play around with it. So I definitely encourage you guys to check out this as much as possible. And of course, with this argument, you can also add in multiple others. So I could say another here, and then we can use text again. And notice another is not actually coming through until we change, let's say, one of these curly brackets to being 1. And then we do text again, and now we see that it actually changes it. Right, so all of this stuff, the string itself could be a variable. It doesn't have to actually be the string to run format on it. So what I mean by that is if I said BC equals to this string right here, and then bc.format, and we will do here and another, just like we did, press enter. It comes out just as expected. So BC itself is really what it's all about. And then once you add the format part, it will replace things. So there's another one is this %s substitution. So this is a little bit more concise. In many cases, you'll probably just use this sort of string substitution versus the format one, especially on a much shorter sentence like, hi there, your name. So we'll do %s here. And hi there, thanks, right? So this sort of string, you might probably just use string substitution versus the formatting method. So string substitution then would be, or excuse me, %string substitution, you would do % and then whatever you're trying to replace there, and I'll say Justin, right? So that is how you do that. Hi there, Justin, thanks, right? So that's a very simple way to do string substitution using this % method. Another thing about this is when you use the %s, a lot of times that will be rendered very easily and well for you depending on what you're working on. So let's actually look at this string right here. If I copy this and I see, notice I say the %s formatted string is very, it's not as robust. It's not as robust as the other one, but still, it still works, right? So what we see here is double S. So if I actually wanted %s to be inside of a % formatted string, then I would actually have to do 2%. That's if you wanted it in there. Not exactly sure why you would, but it is something to note. Okay, so the next thing is float substitution. So float substitution is float numbers on how we're going to do it. So this is really straightforward and simple. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it. And what we see here, let's try that one more time. And what we see here is the various ways on how you can put a number. So this is 20, and it turns into however many decimal places. So %.0 or the number of decimal places you want. F will change it. So 2 decimal places is 20, and then it goes .0, and then so on, .400. That's how you do string substitution with a float number. And of course, this could be a very long number. So let's actually go ahead and show you a very long number. So if I did this text and I did 123 and then some long decimal place here, let's make sure they're all numbers or float, and I press enter and do text, it's going to bring it to 2, right? So it will always format it in the way that we want to see, which is really cool. So it's something that you can use quite a bit, actually. The last thing that I want to talk about for substitution is date substitution. Not going to go into this a whole lot because there is a lot of documentation on there. But the point is you can actually get, using a built-in Python function called datetime, you can actually get what today is, right? So this is 2016, it's June, and it's the 7th. So this is how you actually get that date. And you can actually do a datetime, so datetime.now, datetime.now will actually give you to the second, right, to the millisecond even. So that's actually giving you the accurate time in my time zone as to what it actually is, right? So it's 5, so 17, that's a 24-hour clock. It's 5:06, so this is minutes, seconds, milliseconds. Really cool. Now, if we wanted to format this stuff, we would use all of these different things. So I'm not going to really go into this a whole lot other than the fact that these are some standard types of formatting methods that you can use. So you can see here that if I wanted to use today and it says like shift time basically, or string substitute time, it will actually show us in a date format that in the US this works. It might be a little different elsewhere, but in the US that's kind of a shortened version of the date for today. And then you could add the time itself. And right now this is the time, right? This is the UTC time actually. So that's a universal time. And then we also have our local time and so on. So there's definitely a lot of ways on how you can format dates. And this is just a reference for you to use it if you ever need it. The most important part here is this actual updating of the time comes from a Python datetime object. That's kind of important. If you ever end up going in this and it's not working for some reason, that's why it wouldn't be working. But if you use import datetime and you do all this stuff, then you should be fine. Cool. So now that we've talked about string substitution and a lot more with strings, what we're going to do here is we're actually going to now create a function to craft some sort of message based off of all the stuff here. That is a date substitution, float, and also using format, so keyword, argument, format, substitution, as well as maybe some other things that we talked about as well. So if you have any questions, you can let us know now in this section, because we're going to pause for a second. Let us know now based on this stuff. If it's confusing at all, definitely go back. But really playing around with it and going on this Python cheat sheet is really going to help you really kind of understand how all of this stuff works. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the functions now. Now it's time to put this all together. What we have here is a starting point. So of course, you're going to want to get this on GitHub unless you want to copy the whole thing. This is what we're starting with. We're starting with some names, some amounts, and a message, right? So what we want to do here is we're going to loop through all the names, and also we're going to loop through all the amounts, and then we're going to format the message accordingly and basically print out that message and essentially send it to somebody. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to adjust our message to be formatted. Right now, it's not in a way that can be formatted because we don't have the variables that we've just talked about. So in this case, I would want to change hi there to hi name, right? And then then we go through here, we would want to change maybe this date to date, and then the purchase total to sum total, and I'll say total. Right, so 3 things that we're kind of changing here. So we now have a kind of standard message that we can use for all of these different names. So now what we're going to do is define make messages. So we're making this sort of function that's going to take in names and amounts. So we'll say names and amounts. And this function, we want to return back a list of formatted messages. So I'll just say messages equals to an empty list. And then we'll do if the length of the names is equal to the length of the amounts. So this is kind of important. I do challenge you to break this, but if these aren't the same, right? If they aren't the same length, then what we're about to do will probably break. And I'll explain where it'll break once it would happen. And I'll even show you how it will break. So we're going to say I is equal to 0. I'll explain that in a second too, but hopefully you already know this. We'll do for name and names. So here I'm iterating through the keyword parameter, not these up here. So I'll say default names and default amounts to not get those confused. So for name and names, first off, we want to actually format this message. So let's just format it based off of the name. So I'll just say message equals to the formatted message, or I'll say unformatted, or UNF message equals to UNF message dot format, and then I'll just say name equals to name. Right? I can continue to format the other items too, so I can say date equals to some date, and then I could say total equals to some amount. So let's just do 129 or whatever, 99. So now I have this message. I can also print out this message. So I'll just call this actually new MSG instead of message. So new message and new message. There we go. So we now have this function and it should work. So let's actually check it out. And I'll just say make messages. And now it's going to be default names as the first argument and then default amounts as the second one because first, second. Okay, so now that we've got this, let's go ahead and test it. I'm going to copy this entire thing and we're going to bring it into Python. So I'm going to go ahead and exit it out and then go back into Python 3, paste those things in, and there we go. So it actually did format everything as we see. So it says, hi, Justin. Thank you for the purchase on some date. Just as a reminder, the total was $129.99. Well, that's not what we want. We want today's date and we want their actual total based off of these positions, right? And that's where this I is going to come in. So in each loop, we're going to adjust the position of where it should be. So the first thing, let's go ahead and put the total, and I'm just going to use default amounts, or excuse me, amounts that's being passed as the parameter. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to pass in I. So now what we're doing is we're looping through the names and then we're getting the same position for the amounts. So the first one is going to be Justin, the amount is going to be 123.32. So that's actually all we'll leave it at yet. But then I do also want to do I plus equals to 1. So then that way the loop is actually going through accordingly. And that's even more important why these lengths are important. So if either one was wrong, like if there wasn't enough amounts, then we would get an index error, which I'll show you in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this stuff again. And we're going to paste it in here. And now it actually shows us the amounts. The format of the amounts is kind of bad, but we'll fix that in just a moment. But everything else is right. So the numbers are right. All that's good. So let's actually take off one of these numbers. I'm going to just get rid of that last number there. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And I'm also going to get rid of this if statement. So I'm going to tab this back. So notice I got rid of that if statement and I tabbed all of this stuff back. Otherwise I'd get a spacing error. I'm going to copy everything and come in here. And now I get this list index out of range. So all of them, except for the very last name, which is Whitney, actually don't show up, right? All of them except for the very last name. And that's because these lists are not the same size. Now, if I bring back in the if statement, I'm going to come in here. Now it doesn't make any of the messages. So it's not the greatest thing ever to have this sort of statement, but at the very least, it's not going to break everything. So let's put that amount back in. And now we have all of our amounts. So if I copy and paste it one more time, should work just fine. So now we did learn about the amount formatting in the Python cheat sheet. So if I wanted to format all of the amounts so they all look the same, that is, they all have 2 digits in their decimal place, I could come in here and I could take a look at the float substitution, and I see that there's one called 2 decimal places. So this is how I could format it. So I could literally copy this, come back in here, and inside of name in that for loop, I'm going to paste this in. I don't need to print it out, but I could just change this text to being, let's call this the new amount. And it says 2 decimal places, right? So we can get rid of that part of this string, get rid of that. And now it just says 20, which we can replace with our actual amount, which was amounts. And we paste that in there. Great. So that's the bulk of the actual challenging part for this actual formatting, right? 2 sets of data to format our message. Of course, we can test this out, copy it, paste it in here. And now what we see is the amounts actually change based on the positions that they're in. Pretty cool. Now, the next part is actually updating this date. Now, of course, you could have another list of dates, but instead, I'm just going to say today, because I'm acting like this message is being created for purchases that were done today, now, soon, around this time. This date is just kind of arbitrary, but it is important to see how the formatting the date is done. So what we could do is I'm just going to grab this very first one. I'm going to go ahead and copy that whole thing. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to paste it above my function. So the reason I paste it above my function is because I actually want to put the import at the very top of the Python file. this is actually a best practice type of thing to do, is whenever you import another module, which I'll explain what that is later, but whenever you import something, you're going to want to have it right at the top of Python or the file that you're working in. So now we've got this formatted text here. I can actually go ahead and cut this out and paste it inside of this loop as well. Well, since it's the same actual date, I don't need to paste it in the loop. I can actually paste it outside of the loop because it's not going to change. The date just doesn't change in this loop. Of course, again, if you're wanting to format it to something different, then you totally could do that. So I'm going to use this text for our sum date and just paste it in here and go ahead and get rid of that print statement. And now I'm going to copy everything again and paste it in here. And now what we see is an actual date that's showing up. So there we go. That is our message. It's actually creating and crafting this message for you that is showing you in a date. It's giving you an amount that's based off of a position. And we do have spelling errors. That happens, whatever. But one thing I do want to leave you with and challenge you to do is we have some capitalization errors, and we also might not want to put the exclamation point, or we might want to have a different one for each person. That part, the punctuation is not that big of a deal, but the capitalization might be. So what I recommend or suggest that you guys do as a bonus, which I will have this in the final bonus code, is to update and change these names inside of your function, right? So inside of here, make the change to the default names so they're all capitalized. The first letter is capitalized, and then everything else is not. So like as if you were calling someone by their name. Right now, they're not like that. So that's my little challenge to you. That's the end of day 6. I know we covered a ton here. I realize that, but I do want to emphasize that everything that we covered here is important, but it's just going to be stacked on. So what I mean is we're going to come back to this stuff. This reference guide is something that is there for a reason. You absolutely should use this reference guide. Don't try and memorize these things. Just go back to the reference guide. Over time, they will start to sink in. The main part of all of this is understanding how to use it in context. So when you need to use it. So this example that we did, this function that we built, is an example of when you might actually use all of this stuff in context. Like if you were sending out a message that had to deal with a variety of things of data, this is exactly what you would do, which is really cool that now you can actually build a function. And you notice how simple it is where we started and where we're at now. It's not really that big of a deal. Okay, cool. So if you guys have any questions on this, let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. We hope to see you tomorrow.